Much. It's good to be here again, as always. Been here last time was I think 3 years, so it's been a while. But this very topic was quite a success, and people are very interested in that. And so we're doing this again, but with 3 years more of experience, knowledge, and changed market trends. So this is going to be very interesting. We call it a remote dev team designer. Has nothing to do with design, so we might have to change that name, but. It is about how to design your remote development team, or whether you have one or not. It's we subtitle it "The Secrets of 10 Years of Managing Remote First Product Teams." And so, what this is going to be about, really, I'll maybe uh, go here first. What this is about at the end of this talk, you will feel confident and clear about the structure, roles, and responsibilities of your dev team. That's really what it is. Who, how, what, where. And we also have a workbook about that. So I'll point the right slides, but we'll drop that in the chat for you so you can actually take a look and download that, make a copy, fill that in however you like. And so I'll go back here now. So about myself, just very quickly, my name is Victor Purolnik. I'm the founder of TrustString. I helped over 300 companies launch, raise, scale, and exit. My background is in engineering management and computer science. I've been an advisor, fractional CTO and CPO to startups, and I have founded TrustString. I used to run a software house before. I've been on essentially all of the sides you can be on when it comes to remote software development. And so that sort of gives me that unique insight into how things work. Um, I started in 2013. That is me over 10 years ago at a conference, teaming up with random Ukrainian developers to form a software house. It was everything from a wild success to every single learning you could make running a software house. Anyways, that's when I started. And so I've been in remote software development and building remote development teams ever since. Um, a case study which is actually very suitable because this is Matt who was on this very call 3 years ago and has gone wild places since. So for the title here is from product market fit to exit because that's what he had. He had product market fit and a growing user base, but very unclear management and seniority within his dev team. And so there was a lot of management work. He was micromanaging, lots of inconsistent results. Not really a sellable company at that point, at least from that product perspective, right? And so after workshopping with him, restructuring the team, we actually went for a software house, but a different one. That was what was right for him. And we were hitting milestones and business goals. And then he was able to exit to a large enterprise GovTech company, even though everything was outsourced. So that is a wild success. And they actually liked that team so much, they hired them for their other portfolio companies. So the buyer was happy because the team was well structured. And so there's obviously a lot of approaches, but that was his. And we actually talked to him recently. And he, again, is looking for that managed develop team approach. And so we're going to dive into that in a second. What is important, right? Here are a few key points. Number one, you need to bring the right team to your fight, right? It's like, do you bring the knife to the gunfight, whatever that is, right? The right tool, the right team. Um, you need to understand whether you want to do automatic or stick shift management is what I call it, which is, do you want to do the auto drive or do you actually want to, that was at least a couple of years ago, right? When you can get more out of a stick shift, you can do faster, further, more economic, whatever it is that your goal is, but you needed to know what you do and you needed to constantly be doing it, right? Versus automatic might be a little bit worse, but if you don't want to focus on switching gears, you're probably better off, right? So that's really the approach you need to take. Then you need to know how to attract the best tech talent as a bootstrapped SaaS. How to do that in the competitive talent market out there. Um, and also, last but not least, how to build a remote team culture and accountability to then make that work. So these are the things that we're going to look at, as well as how to pick the right people or dev shops. So let's start. Topic number one, pick your fight, which is what software maturity are you in? A topic that's very neglected by a lot of people. And here are our four levels that we distinguish internally, which is number one, you build a prototype, just a hacky concept to prove a point, quick and dirty, can't sell it. An MVP, which is somewhat polished and includes all the features required to provide end-to-end self-serve value. It is sellable. Might be minimal, but it provides value that people want to buy. Then you have the scalable version for that. Usually doesn't differ much in terms of features, but you can just put a lot of load in there. And it's important to distinguish that. What am I doing? Am I doing A or B, right? And then the last is the enterprise product. Most people don't go there. You just need to take special care, security, compliance, enterprise tech, interoperability with other systems. And my point is, the features between all those might not differ much, but the level of complexity, how you build them, how much it costs, how long it takes, can differ significantly. And that's how you know what fight you're picking. And once you know what fight you want to pick, you need to pick the right team. Um, if you look at that, this is I won't go into all of this. This is um our matrix here. If I'm building an MVP, for example, what is my target code quality? What is my infrastructure requirement? How do I test? What is my dev process, right? And so in a team setup, you want to be really lean, right? You want to have a small team. You want to have maybe one UI UX person, one developer, really do a more pragmatic approach versus on the scalable product, you need automated quality assurance because that's the entire point. If you throw scale at it, you need to make sure that the product works at scale. And in order to dive into that a little more, we'll figure out what are the roles that you need within a software development team. And the important thing here is it's not about having a person for each of these roles, right? Can all be done by one person. Just to understand that you need those roles within your team and who does it. Um, and so again, I won't go into all of this. All of this is also in your workbook. But there's a tech leader, a CTO, a lead dev, a CPO, a product manager, a UI UX designer. There's engineers. There's a manual QA person, a tester, essentially, an automated QA engineer who writes tests. There's DevOps, a project manager, and a business analyst who writes documentation. Right? Can be one person, just to be aware that you need that and who does it. And so in a prototype setting, you just usually hack things together with an engineer. In an MVP, you're managing scope, you're designing it, you're developing it, and you're manually testing it. Again, could be one person or two. The designer could be the product manager, two people, more than enough. A scalable product, though, really needs solid tech leadership to understand how do we structure things, how do we write algorithms, what's the right infrastructure to use here. And on top of that, you need the automated QA to make sure that the product works at scale. We get that a lot of times when people hit product market fit and their product that was working beautifully starts being a pain in customer support, right? Because people are writing in with bugs, things are down, whatnot, because nothing gets really tested when it gets released. And so that's where you also get the DevOps in to make sure the scalable product management is in, and so on and so on. So obviously this is very individual, but usually we see that that's how teams evolve or change. This is in your workbook, so you can assign those team members. You can see who covers what roles really, and then you can see, do I have everybody that I need? Are there any gaps that might be a reason why you run into issues? Do the people who are supposed to have these roles and know they have these roles, right? That's super crucial and usually one of the problems you can run into. Now, let's get into automatic versus stick shift management. So I usually just ask people, what do you think makes it easy or automated to run a dev team? What is just a more thoughtless approach that just works? Or where do you have to invest more time to make it work? And here's the criteria that we've come up with. So the smaller your team, the easier it is to manage. The more senior the people, the easier it is to manage. If you have full timers, that's easy to manage. Part timers are always need to be micromanaged more because of the dedication that comes in. A full stack developer, of course, don't need to coordinate between people. A similar culture and language always helps, right? To avoid misunderstandings, miscommunication, have similar expectation management, and so on. And then here I put outsource. And what I mean by that is, of course, if you outsource to a software house that comes with the entire development process with just a turnkey setup where you just need to pour in the scope and code comes out of the factory, then of course that is easy management, right? So that's it. And what now is stick shift? Stick shift doesn't mean that it's a bad choice or a bad idea. It just means you need to put more work into it to make it work. Of course, you can deliver faster with larger teams, but only if you really know how to manage those. I've seen large teams deliver slower than two senior engineers, right? So um, large teams can work out really well. You just need to know what you're doing. Um, In-house, again, that means that you need to make sure to, I've seen a lot of people switch from a software house to hire in-house engineers and just, the entire process fell apart. You just need to do it. You need to have the leadership. You need to set things up, and then it can work even better. We just need to take care of it. Having junior people, you can save a lot of money, but you need to know how to work with them. You need to have the right seniors. You need to know how to coach them. Cultural differences. It's also great. It actually has a lot of benefits, but I would say the benefits only um, materialize if you know how to work with the cultures first. So um, everybody who says working with different cultures has the added benefit um, of getting those perspectives in that you normally wouldn't get is absolutely right. But you need to know how to work with that cultural difference first. Same with part-timers, on-demand people. You need to micromanage them more. And that is that. So here also is the role distribution canvas that you have in your workbook. And here you can say, okay, who is on my existing team? Who is dedicated? Who is on demand? How do those roles connect? And then we have an advisory level here where you can, if you have any advisors, for example, a fractional CTO or CPO, here you can put people in. So for example, if you realize you lack certain roles, you can decide, okay, do we get them on demand? We don't have a CTO, but maybe we don't need one. Maybe we can get a fractional CTO so that you really distribute those skills and see that you have someone for everything. Um, how to attract the best talent out there as a bootstrapped SaaS company. We all know developers are very sought after, especially the senior ones. There are companies with very deep pockets out there, even though when we did this the last time, 2021-ish, probably it was much, much worse, right? US VC money was literally flooding Eastern Europe and Latin America. And so it was very hard to find good people. That has changed, but not to the degree that they're homeless or anything. So it's still very hard, but bootstrapped SaaS startups have certain advantages that they can use to attract great people. You just need to tell them that this is what you can offer. And so here's what developers really want. What do good developers love? Number one, and you don't need to have all of these. It's just about finding what applies to you and then putting that front and center in your job description. So, do you work with any cutting edge technology? Something that not a lot of companies work with, but is very exciting and somebody would love to work on. Do you have any challenges ahead, like impactful work that is hard, but not hard in a negative way, in a very positive way that can be figured out and that somebody can learn from or evolve with, or just have an interesting challenge? Of course, I'll put it here. Salary and benefits are always attractors, but again, definitely not the only one. If you don't have any of the others, that's what you have to resort to. That's why enterprise companies pay so well. But Other than that, it definitely is a benefit. Now, professional growth and learning, which is one of the key areas, actually. And this is true for most software engineers that they want to grow throughout their entire life. They don't want to, most engineers don't want to go through a career progression. So I implement, then I do concepts, and then I manage people, right? They don't, definitely not. There are a few, but most engineers just want to get better and better and better and better. And so if you can offer that to them, no matter what stage they're at, they're going to love it. Work-life balance, of course, right? If you have things like some companies do have the unlimited PTO policy and they don't even advertise. It's like, do it. Um, a professional dev setup is actually something that's completely underrated. And actually, the companies who have that, which means just a by the book, working, development workflow, branching strategy, DevOps, just everything that how an engineer would love to work and not hack things together. Um, if you have that, do mention it. I know it appears to you that everybody's doing it this way. They're not. Make sure people are aware that they don't have to manually deploy and fight with whatever bash scripts, right? So that is something you can advertise. Career advancement, of course, if you know that, for example, there's going to be a leadership position down the road because you're building your team or anything like that, or you actually have career paths or anything like that, mention it too. Autonomy and ownership is a big one within small bootstrap companies where you can give entire features, feature sets, anything directly to developer that they can own, have a bit of autonomy on, and then just run with the feature and have an actual impact once they release it. Obviously, what helps is having a common tech stack, meaning something that's just it's not the cutting edge tech, but it's just a common stack that people like, that people are not running away from, that is modern, that people like to work on. So all of that increases your chances of finding a really good person and attracting them. Other things candidates want to know for your interview process, what you should prepare is a must-have versus nice-to-have experience in terms of technology. Really separating that out is very helpful. Um, Give out more information about the team and the leadership. Who do you report to? How big is the team? Who does it interface with? Very interesting is always the upcoming scope and projects. So people always want to know what they will be working on in the future. What is your development process? What is your level of technical debt? Um, and then I repeated myself, so sorry about that. But also, what is the recruitment process and how to apply? How many stages are there? How many interviews? Is there a coding challenge? People want to know that up front, ideally also with like salary brackets, and then they can really make up their mind if they want to apply. Uh, a position that doesn't have revenue brackets, doesn't describe that, usually detracts more than having it and not being the best fit. From our experience as recruiters, we see that people with a higher um, with a higher expectation than the brackets give and still apply. They just figure, well, I like the job, I find it interesting, maybe for a good candidate, they will be flexible or I will be able to negotiate, but people still apply. And so that is if everything else fits them. So that is very interesting to know. Um, Now, that is what the hiring mode canvas does in our workbook. So you can fill out this section here. It's like what makes us attractive. You can note that down based on the criteria that we just had. And now we'll go into the next, which is culture and accountability. How do you establish on a remote basis dedication, belonging, buy-in from the team? Um, there's a few things you can do, which is sharing business info, customer insights, company metrics, being very transparent, but trying to bring your people as close to the customer as possible because it's much too easy to stay in silos and have the dev team not even know that you hit a record month, right? Very demotivating. So facilitate that sort of collaboration between teams as well. Don't be the one person in the middle that's pulling all the strings. Empower people to work together. talk about non-business things, but I know what that looks like. So before you organize your first retreat, your Friday night drinks Zoom call is going to be a bit awkward. So organize your first retreat. Um, do those regularly, but definitely do a team retreat. And from that moment on, once people start having those one-on-one bonds, they will carry that onward to the Zoom meetings, and actually you'll have much more productive meetings online. And the most important thing is that this is applicable for software houses too. Too many people think that this is a different vendor, they're outsourced, I can't share any info, they're probably not interested. That's not true. They're working for you full time. Treat them like your in-house team, and you will gain an in-house team, right? So this is very very important, and most people find don't even think about that. Um, Another important thing that is not super easy to do remotely is brainstorming and ideation. And so ideally what you should differentiate is, do I want to present something or do I actually want to discuss something? If it's just about presenting, definitely do the Loom, right? If you want brainstorm, yes, do the Zoom. Use tools like Miro, and just give briefings about what you want to discuss ahead of time. For large questions that really need more brainstorming power and a bit of time, do organize a retreat. Um, for like the once a year larger issues that just need time, right? Because no Zoom meeting takes longer than an hour. It's not possible. And people, especially if you have larger meetings with like five people start working, start doing things. They're not focused. They're not prepared. They're busy. Only if you organize a retreat, you can crack those large issues that you need to discuss with multiple people, and it works really good. So just coordinate those accordingly. Um, in terms of accountability, what I found best is to do very intensive onboarding with multiple touch points per day. So weed out those people who just arrive for the onboarding call and check off afterwards. Um, do daily stand-ups, but they can totally be asynchronous. Especially across time zones, I find stand-up calls not very good. And if you do them text-based in Slack, for example, somebody has to write, "This is what I'm doing today. This is what I've done yesterday." Check off those things. You have a beautiful log over months and months and months, and what you can see over a longer period of time is definitely if someone is over or underestimating their abilities. Um, do active goal setting, progress tracking, KPIs, right? Uh, do peer-reviewed performance. So code reviews done by peers are an amazing tool, and really motivate each other to adhere to the coding standards, to not just push something out because you know it's going to be reviewed. Um, Obviously use issue trackers and make those status updates mandatory. But most importantly, give ownership and demand results over tickets. And that always works. Let's get into cultural differences. And so this is an incredibly interesting topic, and I've had the pleasure to work with brilliant people all across the globe. And while you cannot generalize too much, on average, there are certain differences that are just very interesting from a cultural perspective. And so when it comes to developers, what we see is that, and that's not just cultural, but also educational. There's a lot that goes into that, is that Eastern Europe, the developers in Eastern Europe usually have the most experience working for remote startups simply because they've done it for a very long time. For bootstrap startups specifically, India is much older, but it's always used to be more of the enterprise hub for the Microsofts and so on, right? And so in terms of startup work, I find Eastern Europe is probably the most experienced. They've done it for the longest. There's the analytical mind, if you will. That's a cultural thing. Very good education, good English, depending on where you are, a good to less good time zone, and they're definitely not willing to work late. So that's a big downside. Um, Latin America, if you're in the US, obviously has great time zone, also very good education, but on average, medium-ish English. So that is the one downside here that I would point out to. India, Pakistan, just far away, willing to work late, but still far away. The biggest cultural differences that you can find, and so if you can work with that, brilliant, it's perfect. But if you don't, it sometimes creates difficulties. Um, in Africa, which is up and coming, really, we've seen a lot of great talent there, in a lot of countries, and that's a huge benefit. You have native English, which is great. It completely eliminates the language barrier. So also very good communication, also especially compared to Eastern Europe, which can be very brief sometimes. That is good, but the downside here is that it's hard to find seniors. Just the education isn't there yet. It's very new to the block in terms of there's obviously not that much experience having worked for American startups remotely. So all of that is just lagging behind a bit. Is good for medium skill people. And obviously it also depends on the countries, right? So South Africa is obviously much higher in that than let's for example Nigeria. But still, there's on average you hire less seniors from Africa as a continent in general. And on a cultural note is that there's lots of applicants to go through. Eastern Europeans tend to self-select much more versus Africans tend to apply and see how they qualify. So there's just a lot more to go through. Um, Again, this is just an average from our own data, from what we can see, having done this for a couple of years. Obviously, does not apply to every person. Quite the contrary. This is really just taking averages, and you can find brilliant talent absolutely anywhere. Um, but if you go into that, there's actually more scientific work than we've done within our own limited scope. And so Aaron Meyer, that's a culture map. Um, and Aaron maps cultures on various levels. So, for example, on communication, on how people evaluate others and how people lead or decide who's the right leader, how people decide as a group, who they trust with things, how they disagree with each other, how they schedule, and how they persuade people. And this is extremely interesting. I'm now going to put three countries on here, which is the US in red, sorry, Ukraine in orange, and Colombia in yellow. So, for example, you see how that you have a huge difference in low versus high context communication, right? Here you see a key Eastern European feature of giving very direct negative feedback versus Colombia and a lot of other countries being more on the indirect side, right? Um, and so for example, a big one is also how you trust others, right? So in the US, you trust people based on the task that you need to perform, right? I might trust John with this, but I might trust Bobby with something else. Versus in a lot of other countries, it's more relationship based. I trust John because I trust him in general, and so I'll trust him at this task, not necessarily because of the ability, but because of the relationship. So it's very interesting, and you'll understand certain decisions that are being made. And also whether you avoid confrontation or you go full on what you like or dislike about something, and so on and so on. And here you just throw India and Nigeria into the mix, and you sort of see where you are. So this is just a few examples. A very interesting tool to go through. It costs just a few bucks. There's a book, very interesting if you work a lot with remote cultures. Um, and so with that knowledge, you can now decide, well, between time zones and absolutely everything, where do I want to hire, right? What makes us attractive? Or what regions do we want to hire in? And now we're going to decide on the last factor, which is how do you want to hire that person? So Um, there's a few recruitment challenges that you have today. Number one, we've seen a tremendous amount of specialist tools based on ChatGPT that help people with interviews. And so what we see is that there are a lot of people who slip through like primary interviews with non-technical interviewers, but then get caught in the actual technical interview because what that tool cannot do is very quickly give very precise answers, even if you drill into that. That's still too hard. But giving answers to very generic questions that are used to weed out people, yep, you can really get fooled here. So what's important is do use a good person to do your vetting. Um, in some cultures, you have an overconfidence in your own abilities. And so you're going to get a lot of people that apply. So you need to weed through them as well. And there's people who are trying to get multiple jobs at once and work like an hour or two a day. So you need to take care of that as well. These are the challenges that you have in remote recruitment specifically that you need to address. Now, do you want to hire in-house or outsource, right? There's a stick shift versus automated question. And so the pros of outsourcing, right, hiring a software house, is that it's a single point of responsibility. What does that mean? It means that if something's going wrong, you don't care if it's Ryan, the front end dev, or it's Chris, the back end dev, and they blame each other, and that's your fault. No, that's your fault. It's just that whatever. You go to the software house, you say, please fix it. I don't care who it is, right? The other benefit is it's self-managed. They come with the process. If it's a good software house, they just turn backlog into code. Um, and you can scale them up or down as you need, which is actually the biggest benefit because try scaling your team up. That works very well. Everybody's happy. Try scaling your in-house team down, and you're going to run into some cultural issues. So that you can totally do with a software house. Um, that all of that obviously has a flip side. And so a single point of responsibility quickly turns it into a single point of failure if you're worried about that. So, of course, if your relationship with a software house sours for any sort of reason, well, you can end up without your entire development team overnight, right? So that's sort of the flip side of that. If you hire in-house, of course, you have that risk distributed and the responsibility distributed. One person quits, that's okay, but usually is not a tragedy to your entire company. You have more dedication from each individual, and you're, of course, building up in-house, you're building up knowledge, you're building up culture, you have some more control, but you must be able to commit to that team long term, build those systems, and keep people accountable. If you're willing to do that, you're going to have a great result and you're going to run a killer in-house team. Um, so here's obviously we obviously have a matrix to make that decision. Um, and so the question is first, do you have a full-time product leader? Do you have anyone who is good at defining your product at any of that? Do you know what you want to build? If the answer is no, you need to work with, oh, sorry, uh, with what we call a product shop. A product shop is a software house that also has very good product managers, UI UX designers. They will go into more of the business side. It will help you define the product. They're usually the good ones are usually the most expensive around. So if you need help with that, that's a product shop. If you're good at that, the question is, do you now have a full or part-time tech leader? So someone who, so this above the product leader really answers the question, what do we build in what order and what does that look like, right? The tech leader now says, well, how do we build that? What technology do we use? What skills are required? That's the tech leadership part. And so if you don't have that, but you know what you're building, then you just go to dev shop. And that's a software house that just, you know, they're just going to say yes to everything. They're just going to implement everything. You need to tell them exactly what it is, but they're going to be very good at implementing that and have the turnkey dev process to build the app that you define. So now what if you actually have both a product and tech leadership, right? Then you could just work with people directly, manage people directly. And so you could either work with a recruiter, so just find you the right talent and employ that talent directly, or if you'd rather not hire people in various countries directly, money transfers, international labor laws, and things like that, you can just use what we call an outstaffer. It means it's your talent, they recruit, but they also just do it the employer of record and subcontract those people to you. And those are really the four types of vendors out there that you could work with. And that would be how we decide who to work with. Um, Other factors when you hire, of course, internet connection, work environment, especially remotely. Do they work from their kitchen with kids around? Usually, you have what is vacation, public holiday demand. There's usually a big difference between the US and Europe in terms of what that ideally looks like. And so it's good to just clarify that up front. Do you have the ability to give any sort of benefits? What are the employment laws in any country? And things like that. So here you can say, how do I hire? What type of service provider do you use to get that talent? And now, since we already talked about software houses, how do you vet those? How can you know that's a fair software house? So I would always investigate previous long-term projects. Everybody can build a quick MVP and it sort of works, but um, having reviewing a project that's been in development for over a year, ideally longer than 2 years, if they have any technical debt in there, it's going to be a tragedy. So if everything works well at scale and estimates are still holding up, they by definition know how to build software, right? Because you're not you're you're not interested in code quality for code quality per se. Good code gives you three things, which is scalability, extendability, and readability of code, right? So, what does that mean? It means that even after years of development, everything's on time. You can onboard new developers without huge problems, and you can have a lot of load on it. So, if that is true for long-term projects, well, they probably know how to do that. So that's how you can judge that as a non-technical person. So then you can talk to those clients and ask those questions, understand what happens. Do you have a lot of bugs? Do you how are timelines going, and everything. So that is how you vet a software house as a non-technical person. How to vet developers, again, a bit more difficult because here really need more of that technical knowledge. So some people used to just ask pre-written technical questions, but not really know how to judge them, put that into, what we have right now is, people write technical questions in ChatGPT, ask them, that gets answered by ChatGPT, and then you feed that back into ChatGPT to understand if that was correct. And that, unfortunately, is broken. That process is completely broken. So there's a lot of scammers out there. Um, and you need to understand how to get rid of those. So I would always get a friend or a fractional CTO or a recruiting firm or anyone to do deep technical vetting. If you do that and you start to drill, you can really get there very fast. And of course, do a smartly structured trial period where you then really see in the trenches how that person works, because obviously vetting is only risk mitigation. You're getting better at weeding out the non-fitting candidates, but you can never completely avoid a bad hire. And so after vetting usually comes the actual proof. How do you work? And so that is usually how you do that. What's super important and a lot of people neglect it is intellectual property. This is literally the only reason you need a contract for, and it's not the only reason, but the only real reason that matters, because you need to make sure you own it. Every investor, not every investor, but definitely every buyer is going to look into that. That's the first thing they will look at. Do you actually own your code? If no, the deal is off the table, and we've actually witnessed quite a few transactions where the clients would then come to us running around like chicken without their head. It's like, here's a one pager. Can we please find every developer who's worked on this and sign that? Like that is an actual thing that happens right before an acquisition is very stressful. And so if a one pager solves this problem, you just better do it right away. Um, and we've actually never had a problem where anybody would use that to their advantage, if you will, right? Everybody always signed it, but it's still something you just want to get in front of. Um, so yeah, that's the summary. What do we do? So hire who you really need, right? Number one, make leadership for yourself easy, or as easy as it needs to be. Um, become interesting to top talent. Create a company culture and keep your team accountable. Vet thoroughly, and that will be it. If you want any of the slides, you can email me at vp@trustring.com. Um, with the title Dev Team Designer or whatnot. And we have a podcast and a YouTube channel, how to build successful scalable software products. So we do, if you like this, we do videos on all of that on a weekly basis on more detailed issues on hiring, managing, on scaling, on a lot of stuff related to software development. Yeah. How about some Q&A if we have any?
Awesome. Victor, thanks so much. That was really, really awesome. I do actually have a few questions that someone sent in.
Hmm.
So one of the things that have actually recently come up is we had a couple of founders who they outsourced their dev team, they outsourced all their dev work.
Hmm.
And what happened now is, so now they're trying now, they've scaled enough, they've gotten to a point where they're building their own in-house team.
Yeah.
And what's happening now is now they're trying to get some of the devs from the agency to kind of lead their in-house team. And a lot of the questions I get is how do you kind of handle that situation? Because they're obviously contracted by a different agency, but now, our founders want to kind of get them on a private basis. Have you had situations like that, and how would you handle them?
Interesting. Yeah, usually there's not much you can do, at least depending on who the software house is, because we all know that people tend to not really, at least I know of enough people who made private arrangements with their top TAL developers, let's say, right? Because that's just a company that can't really prosecute that. They just won't know, right? But with a software house that has their employees and they have solid contracts with them, if you might not be on the hook, but the developers might be on the hook. So it's very hard. It's very hard. You don't, and also from a moral perspective, it's tough. And so it's one of the biggest issues that we see. A lot of people transitioning from software houses to in-house teams, for various reasons. And unfortunately, most likely you'll have to build up your own internal team and transfer that knowledge. Most software houses, if you do that right, um, they will have no problem in transferring that knowledge. Maybe if you ask, they will let you buy out a person or two. That's always probably the best option. Um, but if that's not possible, what we usually tend to see is that you just start extending that team. For example, what you can always do well is hire an in-house project manager or an automated QA person. So this is obviously a person that will know absolutely everything, right? Because it's their job. And so you can start building that knowledge this way and then adding role or cutting ties at one point. Um, or you start from the very beginning, and maybe I can go into how we handle those sort of things. You can start working with a company that creates your team from scratch. And so, for example, that is what we do. All of the developers that we hire for you, you have the right to buy them out, or you have the right to have your own leadership. So, um, we actually service people across most of those levels that you've seen. We're a recruiting company, so we recruit developers. But what we also do, um, we do the employer of record, but there's no vendor lock, and you can take those people out anytime you want. And so we're also now introducing managed development like a software house would. So if you don't want to manage people, you want to do that, you want to hand that off, that's fine. And we do that. And we do that on a team that you can take over any point, anytime you want. And so that is something that um, you might want to consider because it's interesting that you're saying that because we keep seeing that too. And that is sort of one of the biggest risks with a software house in general that we're also trying to avoid this way. So that is but again, most people who we know, they just start building around that until they have the right knowledge transferred. They scale that team down piece by piece too, and then there's a point where they just say, okay, stop. But again, there's a lot of strategies around that, depending on how hostile the situation gets, because let's be frank, that does happen sometimes. We have strategies for that. So if anybody has a question, is looking for guidance, is looking, for example, for a fractional CTO to go in and just understand, do we own all assets? Can we review the code? What is our best strategy here? What can we do with this? We have all of those people. We on a, I think, bi-weekly basis, we help with that sort of transition. So very happy to talk to people, very happy to hop on a call. That call is completely free. Just walk people through what their situation is and what their ideal setup could be and what a transition could look like.
Awesome. Thanks, Victor. And then the other question I had was, so we have a lot of founders who, they have dev teams, obviously not in the same country as them. And a big thing is, or a question that keeps coming up is, how often should you have like meetings or stand-ups? So I know you said daily stand-ups, but we have a lot of people who are having daily meetings with their dev teams just to make sure. And that was kind of to bridge the culture gap, but also the language gap. So what have you seen work based in terms of just meetings with dev teams?
Sure. Especially if you're across multiple time zones, I have not seen the daily Zoom meeting work out that well. When somebody is late, everybody's sort of derailed. For some people, it's very early. For others, it's like the middle of their day. They're getting disrupted. If you have more than two, three people on a call, usually everybody else is already doing something, not paying attention anyway. And so it's a bit tricky, especially with development teams. Half people might have their camera off. It's just it defeats the purpose of this entire meeting, which in an in-office setup is supposed to huddle your team around in a room, get pumped up, understand where everybody sat, and then go, right, launch into the day together, which it doesn't really work that way. So you need to find different ways. And for us, again, the asynchronous Slack stand up works really well. And so it's literally just the bullet points in Slack, but you can check them off the next day. You copy that, you do that whenever you start your day, and so it comes trickling in, which is also very nice. And now you say, well, where does that the other part come from, right? The motivational part, the we're gonna start together, we're gonna do this, right? The cultural part of it. And to be frank, I find that if you can't do it this effectively in an in-house, and that is one of the ways how an in-house in-office team is superior to a remote team. There are lots of ways where remote teams are better, but that is one of the ways that just works in an in-office setting that does not work well in a remote setting. And so what I would replace that with is just weekly all hands meetings, weekly calls, where you have a set agenda, where you have certain roles where you can talk about non-business related things too, especially after a weekend when people can share what they've done. And so that works much better um, than the daily. So you split up those functions, do accountability in part in Slack, and you do the social feature more on a weekly. And again, if you haven't had a retreat and you find those social calls awkward, you do have to do an actual team retreat so that everybody kind of gets to know each other and read each other and spend some time together that is necessary at that point.
Awesome.
I,
That's all the questions. That's all the questions I have. Thanks, Victor. Sorry, Ryan.
yeah, I had a few as well. Victor, that was awesome, dude. Really good talk. I wanted
Thank
to
you.
dive a little bit deeper into a couple of things that you mentioned. So, you touched on having a smartly structured trial period for a new dev hire. Have you got any recommendations for like how to structure that? And does it depend, country by country, because there's a legal component to that as well. Like what does that look like for you?
I'll maybe start with the legal component, because I wouldn't say it's it only really applies if you do the if you don't if you hire contract base, you can do whatever you want, right? And so through us, we usually structure these things so that you have a real trial period that where you can cancel. Usually we say the first month you can cancel any day, and so that's how we obviously have the legal support to now make that happen across the countries, but contract based, you're obviously more flexible. Only if you actually hire on an employment contract, that might differ by country what your possibilities are, although most countries will give you a trial period, of course, right? But in order to do that, you'd have to have your own entity or lots of things. So you probably not run into that issue. So legally, I wouldn't say that hiring remotely interferes with your trial period. What's more important though is just making sure that you have the right hire, right? Some of the things you won't know until later, of course, but you can test a couple of things, right? Which number one is a lot of developers don't want to do coding challenges, right? Where you would see, does that person deliver on time? Are they on time in general? How do they think? Can they solve this isolated task, right? And so that's something that you could move into the trial period and say, well, now that I have you, uh, not here's a test task, but here's this isolated task. The worst thing you can do is just tell your developer, hey, just onboard yourself over the course of the next 2 weeks. Here's some materials. So we'll see you in 2 weeks, right? You won't know anything, right? So do give them something to work on, something that is sort of meaningful that you can test. Do have those very frequent check-ins, right? A couple times a day. Actually, I would say, yeah, micromanage over the first 2 weeks. Like micromanage the hell out of them. Why? Because they need your help, right? To get started. And so that's not a bad thing. You set the right expectations. You say that's what the next 2 weeks are just going to look like. Then you're going to be completely autonomous, working on your own, whatever the benefits and work schedule is at the company. But for the next 2 weeks, we just need to make sure we're aligned, you're onboarded, you know what you got to do, that you have no questions, that you get everything set up, that you've done a few of the tasks just to get to know the code base and everything. And then you can very quickly, especially if you've done a few hires, judge the progress. And so there's going to be people who just check off after the first onboarding meeting and you don't see them until the evening. There's going to be those people. There's going to be people who, after 1 hour, already deliver the entire task that you meant them to do for the day. And that's amazing. And so then there's going to be everything in between. So you will have that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, but but you would limit it to a month, I guess, is what I'm talking about. You would
The
make it
trial
like
period.
months. You wouldn't make it ask them to do like a day first for free. Like exactly how would you structure that? So you pay them as normal for a month, and then within that month, you should have a pretty good idea of whether you want to continue with them or not. Is that the
Well, let's put it this way. So developers oftentimes want to play the game this way that they don't do, well, some of them, many of them will do a paid test task even before getting hired. So if it's paid, they see it's serious, and usually I would opt for that. Oftentimes or sometimes that's not possible, and so I would play the game the other way. It's like, yes, you're hired, here's a trial period, but the trial period says I can cancel any day, right? So essentially, worst case, I'll just end at the trial day, right?
Yep.
But obviously it is normally paid, and we've seen that happen. Like we've seen candidates go through the entire process very well and then just not work out on the first day. So it does happen, not very often, but it does happen. So and then I wouldn't do the trial period longer than a month because it's just about that ability to cancel within a day, which I think after a month you should be able to figure out if you want to fire them the next day. And after that, it usually goes to like a monthly cancellation period, which is kind of fair, gives the developer the required stability, still have the possibility to fire them after with a month's notice, of course, but now you should have a bit more confidence in that, I guess.
Absolutely. And second question was just going a little bit deeper on the IP protection stuff. So
Hmm.
you mentioned quite a few different regions in which you could hire outsourced dev talent, or outsourced technical talent in general, I suppose. Is so even if you've got a pretty ironclad contract in place that covers IP protection and all that kind of stuff, how well can you protect that across jurisdictions? So, for example, if I hire someone in Nigeria, or I'm trying to think of somewhere where I'm not super familiar with the legal system, realistically, do you have any sort of recourse if they, rip off your code base? Like, how do you how do you actually meaningfully protect against that? Um,
Sure. And that's really two questions. Number one, about the agreement. Number two, what happens if they misuse that? So, I would answer that the following way, which is, if you can make that agreement based on your jurisdiction that you know, which you can if it's a contract-based thing, right? Obviously, if that's an official employee of your company, then you have to base it on the laws of the country. But that that requires that you actually hire them in a country, which usually means you probably have an entity there or something like that, which means that you have more legal work to do on the ground anyway, and you can definitely afford a lawyer to look at the IP agreement there, right? But let's imagine you have a contract either with an out staffer like us or with the person directly, then you can actually base that on your jurisdiction. And of course, now I'm not a lawyer. I can't give legal advice, and what I'm saying might be entirely wrong, especially in your individual case. But generally, what I would say and what I see is that now you're pretty much safe because this is made on your jurisdiction. And the main point of that actually is not to make sure that they don't use it on their own and for themselves. It's that your buyer knows that you own it. That's the most important reason for that agreement. And that's why I actually wouldn't even do it in a foreign jurisdiction, because now your buyer needs to bring in lawyers of those various countries to make sure that the IP is effectively transferred, right? There's a lot of things like that that can cause trouble. For example, a standard clause in software development agreements is that the IP is transferred after full payment is made, right? And that also creates problems because now your buyer needs to check your bank account and make sure that all those balances were paid, right? Because if you haven't, right, then you don't own the AP. It's bad again. So, but I mean, that's something you can definitely discuss with a lawyer all day long. They're going to be very happy about that. But generally, it's enough that you own. Now, the second question is what to do if a developer just runs off with your code and does something with it. And my answer here would be I've never really seen that happen in all my 10 years. Why? Because developers are good at writing code. Most of them are probably not great at getting your nail salon CRM to market, right? And that's just what it is. I've never really seen that. And even if they do, there's probably not that much you can do. It's just like, I don't think they're going to be successful with it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I wasn't sure if maybe you had some ideas around when you hire a new employee, if you can only give them access to a certain portion of the code base, or if there's some
Sure.
kind of approach that you could take to mitigate that risk. I appreciate that, like, there's probably nothing that you can do that's going to make it completely watertight. But if you're hiring the right people and you manage them the right way and you take certain steps to protect against that, you kind of minimize
I
that
mean,
risk as much as possible.
again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if that actually works. But my strategy would be to have that agreement on your local jurisdiction. So, for example, U.S. law, and then you won't go after a developer in a foreign country that just launched the software as a micro SaaS, for example, somewhere. It makes no sense. But I would just wait until they're very, very big and successful, if they are, and then it absolutely is worth it to go after them and take everything that they have, right? So, I mean, it's just great. They're just going to make a lot of money for you. So, why not?
That's